Student attacks teacher, instantly regrets it when she reveals her true identity. Your support absolutely lights up my day. Before we dive into today's heartwarming story, would you hit that subscribe button? It means the world to me and helps bring you more beautiful tales. Here's my promise. I personally read and reply to every comment. So please, tell me where you're watching from right now. I love connecting with amazing souls like you from around the globe. Ready for this extraordinary journey together? The chemistry lab existed in that fragile moment before chaos. Students hunched over their workstations, the sharp tang of sulfur compounds hanging in the air like a warning. Then Dylan Ross's hand closed around Miss Naomi Harris's throat, and time fractured. The impact against the wall sent glass beakers singing a crystalline song of terror. Somewhere, a gas valve hissed its dangerous breath into the suddenly electric atmosphere. 23 teenagers turned to statues, their faces frozen masks of disbelief. But Miss Harris, her eyes held no fear. They burned with something far more unsettling: recognition. As if she had stared into the face of real monsters and found this spoiled boy wanting. In those suspended seconds, the air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the reckoning that would reshape everything. The morning had begun with such ordinary cruelty. Sunlight struggled through Westbrook High's tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to predict the darkness coming. Students shuffled through hallways thick with the usual symphony of locker slams and teenage chatter, none suspecting that before the bell rang again, their understanding of power would be forever altered. Miss Naomi Harris had entered that chemistry lab like she entered every room, with the measured stride of someone who had walked through far more dangerous places. At 35, she carried herself with a precision that made students unconsciously straighten in their chairs. Her long sleeves concealed more than pale scars. They hid a history that would have sent tremors through the school's comfortable assumptions. The whispers followed her like smoke. Too controlled. Too watchful. Too different. They saw the way she never quite relaxed, how her eyes cataloged exits and potential threats with the automatic assessment of someone trained for survival. What they didn't see was the weight she carried, the knowledge of what real violence looked like, and what she was capable of when pushed beyond the breaking point. Dylan Ross believed himself untouchable. His father's money had insulated him so completely from consequences that he moved through the world like a shark through still water, predatory, confident, and utterly convinced of his dominion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his privilege like armor, using it to crush anyone who dared suggest he might be less off their attention, like a parasite drawing strength from its host. Miss Harris didn't even glance his way. Her voice, when it came, was level as a blade. "Focus on your experiment, Dylan. Your solution is about to overheat." The dismissal hit him like a physical blow. Dylan's jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Teachers were supposed to stammer, to back down, to acknowledge his superiority. This woman treated him like he was nothing. "Don't tell me what to do," he snarled, his voice cracking slightly with rage. "You're not my boss. My dad pays your salary." The silence that followed was different from the usual hush that fell when Dylan made his power plays. This silence had weight, texture. It pressed against the walls like gathering storm clouds. Miss Harris turned then, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes found his across the room, and Dylan felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood: genuine unease. Those eyes held depths he couldn't fathom, shadows that spoke of experiences far beyond his comprehension. "You might believe your father's money controls this school," she said, each word precise as a surgeon's cut. "But in this classroom, science and discipline rule. Sit down." The command carried an authority that had nothing to do with tenure or administrative backing. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere forged in circumstances that would have broken lesser people. For a heartbeat, Dylan wavered, his bravado flickering like a candle in wind. But pride was his poison, and he had been drinking from that well too long to stop now. His friends watched. The class watched. His reputation hung in the balance, and Dylan Ross had never learned how to lose gracefully. "Or what?" he demanded, rising from his stool with theatrical defiance. "What are you going to do if I don't sit down?" Her voice, when it came again, carried an edge that made several students unconsciously lean away. It was the sound of steel being drawn from its sheath, quiet, controlled, and infinitely dangerous. Dylan, blinded by years of unopposed dominance, mistook her composure for weakness. In that moment of catastrophic misjudgment, he crossed a line that would define the rest of his life. He lunged forward, his hand closing around her throat, and slammed her against the counter with all the force of his rage and entitlement. The impact sent shockwaves through the room. Gasps echoed off the walls like gunshots. Chairs scraped against linoleum as students scrambled to their feet, their faces pale with disbelief. A few fumbled for phones with trembling fingers, but most simply stared, paralyzed by the sudden eruption of violence in their ordered world. Dylan's grip tightened, his face twisted in savage satisfaction. "What now?" he spat, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his fingers. "What are you going to do now?" But something was wrong. Miss Harris's eyes didn't widen with fear or fill with tears. Instead, they narrowed with a focus that made Dylan's skin crawl. In that instant, the careful facade of the mild-mannered teacher crumbled, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. What happened next unfolded with the brutal precision of a machine designed for violence. Her hands moved like striking serpents, seizing his wrist in a grip that felt like iron bands closing around bone. Dylan's triumphant sneer faltered as genuine pain shot up his arm. Before his brain could process the threat, her other hand struck his elbow, not hard, but with surgical accuracy that bent his joint in a direction it was never meant to go. The sound that tore from his throat was part scream, part sob, all animal terror. In one fluid motion that spoke of countless hours of training, she twisted free of his weakened grip, spun behind him, and locked his arm behind his back with a leverage that turned his own strength against him. Dylan's body slammed into the counter with a sound like thunder. His face pressed against the cold surface, his breath coming in ragged gasps of pain and shock. The classroom had gone beyond silence into something approaching suspended animation. 23 pairs of eyes stared in absolute disbelief at the tableau before them. This wasn't the uncertain struggle of two people fighting. This was the methodical application of skills that spoke of training far beyond anything a high school chemistry teacher should possess. Miss Harris leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Dylan thrashed like a caught animal, but every movement only tightened the hold that kept him pinned. His friends, who had laughed at his cruelty for years, stood frozen with fear painted across their faces. For the first time in his privileged life, Dylan Ross was not the predator. He was prey, caught in the grip of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Apologize. The word cracked through the air with the authority of a judge pronouncing sentence. Dylan groaned, his body trembling with pain and humiliation, but the pressure on his arm only increased. "Say it," she ordered again, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The boy who had spent years crushing the spirits of weaker students, who had mocked teachers and laughed at authority, was sobbing now. Tears of pain and shame rolled down his cheeks as his carefully constructed image of invincibility crumbled to dust. I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice breaking like a child's. "I'm sorry." Only then did she release him. With a controlled push, she sent him stumbling away from the counter. Dylan collapsed against a lab stool, clutching his arm, his face pale and streaked with tears. The transformation was complete, from swaggering bully to broken boy in less than 30 seconds. Miss Harris straightened her blouse with calm precision, her breathing steady, her expression returning to its usual controlled mask. But something had changed in the room's atmosphere. The students who remained couldn't unsee what they had witnessed. The revelation that their quiet chemistry teacher possessed skills that spoke of a past none of them could comprehend. "Class dismissed," she said simply, her voice betraying nothing of the violence that had just erupted. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, carefully, students began gathering their belongings and filing toward the door. They walked like people leaving a funeral, their usual chatter replaced by the heavy silence of shared trauma. Dylan remained slumped against his stool, cradling his injured arm, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone whose worldview had just been shattered beyond repair. He had learned, in the most brutal way possible that money and influence were no match for experience and skill. As the last student slipped through the door, Miss Harris stood alone in her laboratory, surrounded by the lingering scent of chemicals and the ghost of violence. She had protected herself, as she had been trained to do years ago in places where weakness meant death. But she had also revealed herself, and there would be consequences for that revelation. The whispers would start within the hour and spread like wildfire through the school's social networks. By tomorrow, everyone would know that their chemistry teacher was something more, something dangerous. And Dylan Ross, the untouchable prince of Westbrook High, would carry the memory of his humiliation like a scar for the rest of his life. In the end, it was the oldest lesson in the world, learned in the hardest way possible. Respect cannot be bought, demanded, or inherited. It can only be earned. And when arrogance finally meets its match, the reckoning is absolute and unforgettable.